One of the things that has helped define music over the last several decades is that there's rarely ever one super dominant star that hogs all the spotlight and keeps everyone focused on them. Yes, even the mighty Taylor Swift has to share the spotlight with people like Ed Sheeran, Beyonce, Billie Eilish, and more. And when you think about the golden days of rock and roll, you might think of people like Elvis Presley. He came out of nowhere to stun the world with a voice like no other and moves that were so good that they had to be censored when they were shaking on TV. However, even with the legend that Elvis made for himself, there were others that stood right beside him and had their own fame and then kept going after the king had passed. Pat Boone was one such man, and his journey was tied to Presley's in more ways than one. We'll break it down for you, but before we do, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. 5. The early days of Pat Boone. For those who don't know about Pat Boone or his influence on music as a whole, allow us to regale you with his tale. He was born in Florida in 1934, but he was raised in Nashville, Tennessee. Many of you likely know that as one of the key places that music in the United States was harvested from. What might surprise you, though, was that he didn't start out as a young child star in music. Instead, he did best by the Southern teachings he was raised with and went to college. Multiple colleges, in fact, until he graduated with a degree in English from Columbia University. That actually helped him in the long run, as it made him someone who was far more articulate than your typical singer, who oftentimes bought songs from other writers and merely sang them. When he started to get into music in the 1950s, his mere presence, combined with his incredible voice, made him something that many people were immediately attracted to. Why is that? That's because he wasn't a rebellious soul, but a clean-cut one. 4. Perception and image. As noted, Pat Boone was raised via Southern teachings, and one of those was being raised as a Christian man. As such, when he went onto the stage to perform, he had a wholesome vibe to him that was in direct contrast to the rather rebel-infused imagery that others of that period, including Elvis Presley, would ride high on. Sure, there were plenty of people in America and beyond that wanted that rebellious side, but there were just as many who wanted someone to look up to that was like them. And Pat Boone was the embodiment of that. And that brings us to his first successes in music. Recall that we noted many artists merely bought songs from other writers, performers, and then made bank off that. Well, Pat Boone did that at first, and it was one of the more divisive elements to his career. He bought songs from famous black R&B artists, including famous ones like Little Richard, and did them his way. And because Boone was emphatically white, people listened to those tracks in spades. The irony here is twofold. First, they were all successes, which helped elevate Boone to new heights in the music world. Second, because of what he did for better and for worse, white people suddenly understood the charm of R&B style music and were fine with listening to it afterward, no matter who sang it. Sometimes you need someone to break the ice, and Boone did that. Sure, he was accused of cultural appropriation, but given the long-term impact of it, you could argue it was the best choice for both sides. Besides, he bought the songs instead of stealing them, so no one lost out by doing this bargain. 3. Success. With his success in the 1950s and onward, Pat Boone became one of the biggest names that music had at that period. It's true that Elvis was overall more popular than Boone, but the gap between them was arguably much closer than you might think. For example, when Boone was doing his more clean-cut music, he had dozens of singles on the top 40 chart, and he had 6 #1 singles. And to be clear, that was just in a span of a few years, not decades. Even when you look at the fan bases that the two had, Boone and Presley had pretty much equal measure to one another. Plus, as we touched on, Boone was known for his clean and wholesome style and image, which meant that he had the respect of many in the older generation who didn't like the vibes that rock and roll were giving them. He was getting so popular that he had a variety show named after him, which helped accelerate his fame even more. Just as cool was that his show highlighted other young talents in the music field, showing that he wasn't afraid of giving the spotlight to others instead of making everything all about him. And when that wasn't enough, Pat Boone would go on to have a nice little career in film, with Hollywood being more than happy to have him in movies that catered to the younger generation, while also being, wait for it, wholesome. This wasn't a case of Boone being typecast, though. Instead, this was what he wanted. He was famous for doing roles that people could be happy to watch and enjoy no matter their age. And if Boone felt that the role clashed with who he was as a person, he flat out rejected it. There are many who would mock such decisions, and yet it helped strengthen his position in the eyes of the public, and that standing would last for decades to come. That would include in the 1990s when he actually did a somewhat tongue-in-cheek metal album that was actually a tribute to rock and roll classics in the past, but with a more metal edge to it. He even came out at a music awards show in all black leather to show how into the genre he was for the project. While not his greatest hit, it did have a loyal following, and it highlighted how, for him, music was something that could evolve and appeal to all sorts of people while also not betraying who you are as a person, which, if not apparent, was something that Pat Boone arguably valued more than anything else. Yet, if you were to boil down his successes to flat numbers, you'd find that he sold over 50 million records, recorded over 2,300 songs, had multiple gold albums, and so on. He is by and large one of the biggest artists of his period, and his legacy continues on as he continues to live. 2. The true clean-cut star. We've talked about it plenty so far in this video, but before we get to his bond with Elvis Presley, let's talk about why Boone's image is what so many remember to this day. That simply is because during the age of rock and roll and the periods that would follow, there were numerous artists that came out and had a memorable career, only to have various tragedies and scandals follow them until their untimely deaths. If we were to list all of the legendary performers who fit that criteria, we'd be here for quite a while and wouldn't be talking about anything else. And yes, Elvis Presley does fit that mold. In contrast, though, Pat Boone is someone who straight up didn't have many major scandals in his life. The only one of note was the musical appropriation at the beginning of his career, and even that one can be ignored due to the impact it had on both sides of the equation. Due to Boone's upbringing and his personal belief in God, he lived a life that many would consider pure. He maintained a healthy lifestyle. He was married to his true love for 65 years until she passed on. He did all manner of charity work and would speak out about his faith in meaningful ways, including right now in his 90s. In other words, he walked the walk and he talked the talk, and people appreciated how sincere and real he was, versus many who pretend to have such scruples and yet are exposed as being frauds. Boone was never that, and that has given him clout for decades. That being said, it's also created rumors about how he really felt about Elvis Presley and others like him. After all, you'd expect these two to kind of be polar opposites and thus not like each other, right? However, later in life, Boone did talk about his feelings on Presley, and you might be surprised about what he felt about the King. 1. Boone and Presley. In recent years, Pat Boone made it clear that the press were some of the biggest instigators in building the rumors of hostility between him and Elvis Presley. Perhaps it was to create a further divide between the two sides, or perhaps it was just to sell papers. It doesn't really matter in the end. Boone noted that the press were sensationalizing whatever they could to build up drama that seemingly wasn't there. That got cleared up by Pat himself when he noted that despite their different lifestyles and feelings about certain topics, he really did like Elvis Presley. For example, he had a great deal of respect for Elvis due to his raw talent and the fact that both he and Elvis were dedicated to the art of music as a whole. Plus, even Boone couldn't deny that Presley had a magnetism toward him that could draw just about anyone in. As if that wasn't enough, he told stories about what it was like to meet Presley at certain shows or events, and noted that Elvis was actually rather shy when he wasn't on camera, which isn't what you would picture the legendary man being. However, despite that, Presley knew how to turn it on when the lights were bright, and that was just part of his charm, which Boone respected. Still not enough for you? Well, Boone may have been a straight-laced singer who did great things in his career, but he could tell instantly that Presley would be a legend long before that title was bestowed upon him. Sometimes you just know things. Now, that's not to say that he totally agreed with everything Presley did. That would be in direct conflict with his own beliefs. However, true to a man who follows the word, he didn't get jealous of Elvis Presley and the success he garnered. In fact, he actually praised his counterpart for making a new path that many people in the music industry would get to go through after their main times had passed. But he did hold one big sorrow toward Elvis, and that was that due to their different situations and social circles, Boone wasn't able to help Presley when things started to spiral downward. Pat felt that Elvis was merely searching for true purpose and didn't have anyone around to guide him on the right path. Even if he couldn't have saved him, Boone is the kind of man to have wished that he could have tried, which in many ways shows just how much he did care for Elvis Presley, because he wouldn't wish his early demise upon anyone. In fact, Pat Boone has often reflected on how fame can become a trap if you're not grounded. He's spoken in interviews about how the industry can chew people up and spit them out if they aren't equipped with the right tools, faith, family, purpose to navigate it. Boone knew from his own experience how tempting it was to indulge in the excesses that come with stardom, but he made conscious choices to protect himself and his family from those dangers. And when he looked at Elvis Presley's rise and fall, he didn't see a cautionary tale meant to scare people. He saw a talented soul who was never shown how to be truly free despite having the world at his feet. That feeling of what might have been continues to linger in Boone's words whenever he's asked about Elvis. He never claims superiority, nor does he sugarcoat the darker chapters of Presley's life. Instead, he talks with empathy, acknowledging that even legends can be lonely, even icons can feel empty. And that's what makes Boone's relationship with Elvis, even if distant and mostly observed from afar, so compelling. It's built on mutual respect, shared history, and an understanding that fame is never a guarantee of peace. In later years, Boone became more outspoken about helping others avoid the fate that befell many of his contemporaries. He started programs, wrote books, and gave speeches encouraging young artists to keep their identity intact, to remember who they are beyond the stage lights. In a way, he became the elder statesman that rock and roll never knew it needed, one who didn't just endure, but thrived because he stayed true to his beliefs. That's part of why Boone's legacy matters just as much today as it did during his peak. While many artists from his era have faded into obscurity or become defined by tragedy, Pat Boone has remained a symbol of balance. He represents a version of success that isn't riddled with scandal or regret. Instead, he offers a counterpoint, a reminder that longevity, integrity, and impact can all coexist in one career. It's also worth noting that Boone's influence stretches far beyond the music itself. Generations of fans have watched him grow older gracefully, still singing, still advocating, still standing by his values. And now, in his 90s, Boone is arguably more appreciated than ever. Not because he was the most controversial or the most cool, but because he proved that character lasts longer than chart-topping hits. In the end, the story of Pat Boone and Elvis Presley isn't a tale of rivalry. It's a parallel journey. Two men rising in the same era, under different lights, each leaving an undeniable mark. One blazed fast and burned out too soon. The other took the slow road and is still walking it with purpose, and both, in their own ways, helped shape the world of music and culture forever. And that's all from the life and times and Pat Boone, and how he remembers Elvis Presley, while also noting how Elvis influenced his own career in various aspects. Were you a fan of Pat Boone and his music? If so, which of his styles and songs piqued your interest the most? How many more people do you feel need to come forward and talk about their feelings and memories of Elvis? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.